Kia ora tātou, ko Andrew Sargent, toko ingoa. Today we'll be going through the Level 2 AgHort livestock growth and development exam with our presenter Kerry Allen. These webinars are brought to you in conjunction with Study It. So if you have any questions after this live stream, you can always jump into Study It and go ask questions throughout like this. If you have any questions, just chuck them in the chat and I'll feed them to Kerry. But without further ado, over to you, Kerry.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kerry Allen and I am an AgHort teacher specialising in Level 2. So today we are talking about 91294, which is demonstrate understanding of how New Zealand commercial management practices influence livestock growth and development. So you should be able to see there on the screen showing you the standard, so the requirements for achieved merit and excellence. And then today's focus is going to be looking on the management practices of feed and nutrition, breeding and health, and then also a good understanding of growth and development. So that's just breaking that down. So the contents of today is firstly understanding what we mean by commercial livestock, then looking at what livestock production, or how does it occur, how does livestock production occur? Then we're going to move into the management practices. Then I'll explain how those meet achieve, so achievement for the standard. Then we'll move into merit and have a good understanding of how taking that achieved and moving it to that higher grade. And then lastly, looking at excellence and understanding on what we require for excellence. And then I'll have one question from last year's exam at the end, which we will go over. So once again, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. Okay, so firstly, this standard requires us to understand commercial livestock. So these are livestock that are raised commercially in New Zealand. These are used for commodities such as, or products such as food and fibre. So this is quite a wide range of livestock. So you can include the insects, horses, and more traditional things such as your pigs, poultry, deer, etc. Now, in this exam, you must use 3 livestocks. Each question is a different livestock. Dairy cattle and beef cattle are both cattle, and therefore that is one livestock. So you need to be aware of that before you start. So my suggestion is the very first thing you do in your exam paper is to read all the questions and take a moment to decide which question you're going to answer with which livestock. Now, if you're not sure about a question, you are better to use a livestock that you are more familiar with than randomly choosing the livestock that they have given the context for. So if they have given the context or a picture of an alpaca and you know nothing about alpacas, please do not write about alpacas for your answers. Usually the people that do that do not do very well, okay? So go back to what you know: goats, poultry, horses, deer, cattle, sheep. Choose one of those and answer the questions. The context usually is just there to give you an idea of what you could write about, okay? There is no compulsion to use it. Okay, so once you have decided on what livestock you're going to do, we now need to understand how that livestock production occurs. And in particular, there's 4 things that this occurs for. So firstly, it is growth. Then secondly is development. Thirdly is those growth rates, so how fast that animal grows. And then lastly, life processes. So that is digestion, reproduction, etc. So we're going to cover those just very briefly because these are the things that you need to be covering in your answers, in particular for merit and excellence. However, your management practices, which is for achieved, need to be related to these things. So you can't randomly just pull out a management practice and write about it if it's not related to any of those 4 things. Okay, so firstly, we're going to look at growth. So livestock growth is the increase in weight and height of an animal over time. So obviously, if they on that graph you can see there, they have increased in their weight. So from birth or pre-birth in the utero, conception, for example, they don't weigh anything right through to their maturity, or when you are going to send them to processing. Okay, so there are actually some different sections about growth, and these on the side here that I've just put up are some of the things that you can essentially talk about. So we do have different areas of growth, such as prenatal, so that's before birth, then birth weight, postnatal growth, which is after birth, then looking at nutrition while animals are growing, and then looking at the absence of extremes, and then which means things such as not being fed well, or poor environmental conditions such as no shelter, so they're using all their energy and they don't put it on growth. And then the last one is inheritance. So you can be limited by the genetics that they have, or you could be improved by the genetics you have. Okay, so there you see on the side a little bit more information about each one of those areas. So you can talk about these during your discussion. For example, factors that affect the size at birth are how many are inside. So if you've got a single is going to be bigger than a twin or a triplet or a quad. The size of the mother, so if she is small and has a large baby, there potentially is going to be problems. The age of the mother, so if she's 18-year-old cow, she's more likely to have issues than a 4-year-old cow. Sometimes the sex of the offspring, so the baby, can be bigger. So males tend to be bigger than females, so sometimes that can cause issues. The breed, some have higher birth rates, so the baby weighs more at birth in some breeds. So some are easier to calve per se, and some are harder. So these things, and as well as the level of nutrition, so how big that baby has got in utero, will determine how well the growth is at birth. Very similar, it goes into postnatal, so after, but there's 3 more areas that we just need to quantify there. First one is climate. So if they're in cold conditions, they use more energy, so they don't put on weight as easily. It's pests and diseases, so these are external. So if they've got lice or ticks or some form of diseases, then obviously that's going to cause a lack of weight. Stress, so if they're constantly under stress, such as a farmer beeping their horn or rounding a dog up, or fireworks going off, that causes stress, and they also don't put on growth. And then how you manage them. So if you constantly moving them, or you're not providing them with enough feed, or something along those lines, you may also affect their growth. Okay, so we're going to move on to now livestock development. So development is the changes in the shape and the composition of the animal over time. So this is, I've got the pictures up there of just cattle. So looking at a calf, you can see there that the calf's all legs and head, and then as they get into a mature bull, he's all shoulders and rumps and a smaller head, and his legs look shorter. So that's what we mean in the change of shape. However, we also have a change in composition. So this is the ratio of bone, fat, muscle, etc. And you can see that on that diagram, the little graphs beside it are showing you where the supply of those nutrients goes as they grow. So once again, this has some laws. It has 7 laws of development, and things change. So firstly, the first thing that changes is that body proportion. Tissues grow in a particular order, and that's shown also on that diagram. So some things occur first, such as brains and eyeballs, being relatively important, and organs occur first, and then bone, muscle, and fat. So if the animal's not getting the nutrition, that's the order of how it goes. Then look, the tissue's growing at different rates. So some grow fast and some don't grow very fast, so that can affect that development. Males tend to have more faster development than females, and hereditary and nutrition does as well. Now, lastly is the fat deposition. So that goes down last. So your animals, if you're doing beef, for example, for the processing market, you need to have some fat on them. That is put down last before all the other, last after all the other development has occurred. So you need to be mindful of that. Okay. Third one is growth rate. So this is the rate at which we're trying to get those organisms to grow to slaughter. The faster we can get them to slaughter, the faster you can turn them over or make a profit. This does depend on what you are producing. So sometimes fast is not good. If you're doing brood mares, for example, you're not trying to get them to maturity quicker. You're trying to have quality of those brood mares. So depending on what you're doing is depending on how this will go. But basically, you're trying, as that growth rate increases, you're going to have a more healthy, younger animal who's given adequate food and water and shelter. And these things, once again, are dependent on those other things we've just talked about. So I'm not going to go over them again. They're on the right-hand side there. But if they don't get enough of those, then you will find your growth rate decreases, and then you can go into negative and the animals are not putting on weight. You can also have permanent stunting, which means they don't grow very well. And then you can have compensatory growth where they grow really fast and then stop growing. So those last two you probably don't need to worry about too much. You're just going to need to talk about whether they're increasing or decreasing or whether they've got a static growth rate. Okay, so why we generally want a rapid growth rate is because there's lots of advantages for these. So often we can get them to market sooner, which means you're going to make money faster. It means there's less feed to feed them, and particularly in the summer period where you're going to run out of feed. And they're often easier to get to that when they're growing like that. It's easier to get them. Once you've got them at a particular weight, it's then harder to put more on. But basically, you're trying to have them feed freed up for other livestock. So there are some things on this side there that's saying why we want often to have rapid growth. Okay, so when we're doing meat production, and a lot of your organisms that you or livestock that you're looking at is for meat production. So I'm just going to cover this very briefly, but that is showing your that graph is showing you that change in body composition with that increasing live weight. So you can see what happens to muscle, fat, and bone. So bone, as you can see, gradually or increases, but the others are quite rapid. So you are wanting to increase that muscle if you're doing beef production with some fat. And once again, those same things can affect that composition, particularly that deposition of fat, so putting fat down. But also if you had lots of problems in terms of feed or nutrition, then you're going to have a problem with your muscle being put down as well, which is usually what you're selling. So the factors that affect those are on the side there. So these are all some of the things that we're going to cover as management practices as we go through. Okay, now down the bottom there, I've talked about the market requirements, and those are excellence level things. So looking at the quality, quantity, and price, and potentially timing and genetic potential. So I will talk about those in more depth later, but you're aiming for a particular market to improve those factors or those market requirements. Okay, so just here very quickly just showing you as an example, if you're looking at premium lamb carcasses and you're trying to get these to market, then you can see there over time how they grow. They're putting on those proteins and then it goes to fat. So you want to sell them at that optimum time, so where that starts to plateau. If you wait too long, they get over fat and then you're going to have a reduced price. Same thing with the carcass quality. You are measuring that quality to find out when is the optimum time to sell. Okay, and you can stop the video and have a read of that, looking at GR measurement. Okay, another example is just looking at that weight and GR together. So you want to have that proportion right because that is what you're being paid on if you're looking at a lamb market. And these need to be managed with your environment, your farm that you're on, your topography, your soils, your sowing conditions, your climate, etc., as well as the farm management practices. So it is often hard to get all that perfect to get your animals to market at a perfect time. But that is the beauty of farming, and that is what you are trying to achieve. Okay, so the last one there for this section on growth and development is looking at those livestock processes. So there are 4. So this one is, the processes are under these 4 headings, should I say. So reproduction systems, so looking at how they reproduce. Then looking at digestion, so looking at the digestive system. And then health can often relate back to the reproduction and, growth and development of that organism, and same as climate. So if it's a good climate or environment that they're in, then they're going to grow well. So those last 2, the processes is growth. Okay, so firstly, what do we mean by reproductive systems? You do need to have an understanding of how they work, so how they are utilised. So you should know all the terms, and if you do know them, then please utilise them. So in terms of literacy, these are the words. If you know what the word is, use it. It shows a demonstration of your knowledge. Okay, uterus cycle, if you're going to talk about reproduction and some of the management practices such as CEDARS or AI, then please you need to use the uterus cycle. You need to explain briefly how that works and say how your management technique is going to improve using that. Okay, the next one, I jumped one. So just to sort of wrap that little section up, is you're trying to talk about how reproduction is useful as a management technique and for production. So basically you are replacing stock. You're trying to get animals to works, and you're going to be replacing them. So you're going to be stimulating that to provide milk for the dairy industry, or replacing organisms for the beef, poultry, or if you're looking at horses potentially, you will be looking at breeding stock. So you're going to be selling the breeding stock and then replacing them in your herd. Okay, the next one is digestive systems, and remembering that there's 2 types. So these are ruminant digestive system, which is your cows, sheep, deer, and goats, and then your next one is the monogastrics, which is your pigs, horses, and chickens. Okay, very quickly going over these, remember that ruminants have 4 stomachs. Potentially they are they are used for breaking down plant material. They will regurgitate some of that plant material, which is called the cud, to re-chew it, to break it down further so it can go through their stomachs to be broken down. A very efficient system of using plant material, something that we cannot do very well. Remember, there's different parts for different reasons. I'm not going to go into this a huge amount of detail, but it's showing you there the 4 stomachs. And then you can also talk about the villi in the stomachs and how they absorb nutrients. So this is starting to move you through into that sort of merit answer and potentially through to excellence. Okay, just remember that rumen development develops over time. Does not occur straight away. So in a calf, it's only 30% developed, and it needs to get to 80%. So a calf needs to be able to process milk, and so that is mostly done in its 4th stomach. So if we just go back, it's done in these omasum and abomasum, particularly the abomasum, so it's absorbed straight in. But you need to be able to develop these other stomachs so that they can break down and get the nutrients out of grass. So after about 4 months is when it's fully developed. Okay, also the esophageal groove is in a calf, and that takes the milk straight from the throat and straight into the abomasum. Okay, so that can be broken down there. So it's just showing you how that changes, because after a while that esophageal groove is no longer functioning. It doesn't work. So if you keep feeding the milk after a period of time, it's not going to be efficient. It's not a good use of resources. Okay, so to stimulate ruminant stomachs, the rumen's development, you need the scratch factor. So that's just providing you there with a bit of background. You can, I'll keep going and you can stop the video and just read that through. Okay, just briefly into monogastrics. So this is ones with only one stomach. And so once again, a similar sort of process occurs, but they cannot break down grasses or plants as well as ruminants. So therefore, their feed is going to be different. So be mindful when you are looking at a question on what your feeding requirements are, because if you're talking about feeding an animal a particular feed, it needs to be ensured that it's related back to their digestive system. Okay, now fairly obvious, but all animals require nutrients from food. So they need these 8 things. So they need carbohydrates for energy, they need protein for growth and repair, they need fats, they need vitamins and minerals, obviously need water. However, there's some things that they also need that sort of builds on, and you need to have some understanding it, and that is dry matter. So that is what is in your feed once you take the water out of it. And we usually measure some of these feeds in megajoules of metabolic energy or metabolizable energy. So that means we can compare feeds from one or the other. So you should know what these terms are, because if there's a question on feed, you should be able to compare them. Okay, I will briefly talk about some of it later. And then lastly is MJME/kgs per dry matter. So your metajoules of metabolic energy over kgs of dry matter. And so you're putting those two things together so you can work out the amount of energy per kilogram of dry matter. This is particularly good for when you're costing it, because it all costs money. So you're trying to feed your animals the most efficient and most cost-effective manner with quality feed. Okay, and on the side there, it shows you what feed is required for your different animals and different stage of growth. So if they're mating, they only need normal feed or up to 1.5 feed. If they're pregnant, they need 1.5. If they're lactating, they need 2 to 2.5 times. And if they're growing in weaners or young stock, then they need 2 times. And if they are lost condition for some reason, say it got really cold or if no one shifted them for a period of time, then you need to increase that feed so that they can put on increased growth. Okay, and lastly is looking at health, pests and diseases. So we try to minimize this as much as possible because good health means that you increase that production. So A, they grow better, but B, they're alive, and therefore you will have more animal products to sell. Also, this increases quality. So if your animals are sickly, then their products that they're giving off, such as wool, venison, velvet, meat, etc., is poor. So direct causes of these are injuries, poisons, microorganisms, parasites. The list is up there. And then we have indirect causes such as bad weather or poor nutrition, their age, etc. There's other factors up there as well. So some of these can play a part of why they may be unwell. So you're trying to minimize those as much as possible. Okay, what's the effect of disease and pests on livestock? Those are on the side there. Usually they are lower production, so they don't put on growth. They can be infertile, and worst case scenario, if they're very sick, is that they die. So you don't make any money from animals that die. So you're trying to reduce that as much as possible. Okay, and the last one is shelter. Now, once again, this is relating it back to those livestock processes, which is growth. Okay, so if they are in a good warm environment, not trying to keep warm because they're outside in the cold, then they will grow better. Hence why we have bee boxes, we grow poultry and pigs inside because it's nice and warm and they grow better. So once again, you have better quality products and reduced deaths. And this is exactly pretty much what I've just said. If they're not trying to keep warm or seeking shelter, they have better food convergency weight efficiencies, so they put on growth better. They're able to use all the intake of energy and for growth, and we'll cover some of this a bit more later. Okay.
Just one question.
Yeah.
Someone asked, how would we discuss pregnancy on the effect of the product?
Pregnancy, so you're increasing the quantity of your stock. So that's how many you're getting. So, depending on how the question's structured, you would talk about increasing that amount of livestock to go to market. So you'll need to make sure you feed them well, because if they don't get enough nutrition in that period, either you'll have very small, say if you were lambs, you'd have very small lambs. They are harder to keep alive than bigger ones. But also if the mother has put all her nutrients into the fetuses, then she comes out after birth being very low weight, and then she struggles to feed them, and then potentially one of them will die or she might die. So feeding is very important when they're pregnant to ensure that you get live animals at the end of the pregnancy. Did that answer the question?
Hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah, it should be fine.
We're going to cover probably a little bit more on that as we go through.
Cool.
Okay, so we'll move into now some examples for achievement. So you need to be able to describe livestock practices. Now, the minimum requirement for the exam is you have to cover 2, so 2 of the questions have to be correct. So you need to make sure that you have an appropriate management practice for the question that is asked. You need to state how it is carried out, and you need to state what it does to growth and development of the livestock. Okay, so it needs to relate to that. Oh, wrong one. Oh, I jumped one, sorry. So you absolutely need to know how each of those is carried out. And then as we move into merit, you need to explain why it's done and really link it really well to one of those things that I've just covered, which processes growth and development or growth rates. So basically, why do you carry out that is the merit part, but we'll cover merit in a moment. So there is heaps of management practices we could cover, and I am not going to cover them all, but I will just go through a few. This one is on reproduction only. So here there's a whole things. We could look at genetics just of the animals, breed selection. We can look for particular traits, such as in sheep, we might look for foot rot resistance. Then we can move through into the actual process of mating, looking at sexed semen or terminal size or flushing. Then we can look at some other management practice such as castration or crypt orchids, or we can bring animals into heat earlier, such as using cedars, looking at artificial insemination, or even just recording and selecting by ear tags. So that's not an exhaustive list. There's probably others you could utilize, and it will depend on your livestock. Some are more relevant to some livestock. For example, flushing is only done with sheep, so you wouldn't talk about that for beef. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too long on these. You can stop the video and read the notes, but a good one, or often one that is used, is looking at genetics. So just passing on that information and having the genetic information and understanding hybrid vigor. So we often use that in the ag industry because it increases those desired traits. So that's why we'll often breed Holstein Friesian dairy cows, and we've developed our own breed with Jerseys to make a Kiwi cross cow, and so that increases that genetic diversity and improves that hybrid vigor. Okay, so we can choose breed selection as one, and all of those things up there, I've just done it for beef, but you could pick a particular breed for their particular temperament. So, for example, there's a picture there of Herefords. There are particular Herefords that you can purchase that have calving ease. This means they have been bred to ensure that they have good, easy calving situations, and you're not going to have to help them. Okay, so those are some of the things you could look at. Flushing, remember this is an increase in feed prior to mating, usually more than 3 weeks before. And this will increase your chances of multiple ovulation, and therefore you'll have twins and triplets, etc. So that increases your lambing percentage. It means you have more lambs for sale. Okay, looking at heat detection. There are many methods of looking at that, and I'm not going to go over them all, but there's some examples shown. So heat detection is when they come into estrus and you want to mate them. This is really important if you are trying to artificially mate your animals. If you're artificially mating your animals, you can often do it with artificial insemination, and therefore you have to be able to collect the semen. So this explains just a little bit how you do it, and then it moves on to the actual process of artificial insemination. Okay, so what you're actually doing there. You can stop the video if you'd like to read that later. Okay, then moving into entire rams or crypt orchids. So remember, by crypt orchiding them, you are meaning you're taking away their testicles, or you're pushing their testicles up into the body, and therefore the sperm dies because it's too hot. These animals, these lambs predominantly that we do them with, are usually easier to handle, but they still have the male genitalia, which means that they grow faster. So that is why they're often used. Okay, then moving into
just
nutrition.
One question. That's right. Someone asked, would we ever discuss lethal alleles in terms of a reason for interbreeding, i.e. a genotype of two recessive alleles causing
you could
death?
Potentially, but it wouldn't be directly asked. No, there's probably easier things to talk about rather than those. Yeah. So, yeah. So you'd be talking about breeding as the or selective sires as your management practice. So, yeah, you probably don't need to talk about lethal genes.
Cool.
Okay, so moving into nutrition, once again, there's a whole heap of things here you could do in terms of management practices. I've listed a whole lot up there. Some of them will be repetitive from the previous, such as flushing. That is okay. You use it wherever it's appropriate to answer the question. So this one, you can look at types, as I said, composition, or when you're feeding them, how digestible that feed is, body condition scoring, looking at pasture in particular. So there you can look at the types of pasture, types of grasses, the management of those grasses, such as grazing, but also supplements such as silage, mowing, etc. You can also buy in feeds such as palm kernel or grains or concentrates. So there's a huge range here once again. So this question will once again be dependent on the animal that you are looking at. So for all of them, though, they are broken into these three things, and that is palatability, so how tasty it is, the type, so whether it's a roughage, a succulent, or a concentrate, and you can see the differences of those on the screen, and digestibility, so how easily it is to break down. So, for example, if an animal is taking a lot of energy to break something down that they're eating, then they're wasting the energy. It's not going into growth and development. So you're trying to find a balance of having good things that they need, but making sure that they're easily able to digest them. Secondly, if they don't like eating them, they will not eat them. So they need to taste good as well. So here's just some examples on that feed selection. So depending on the age of your animal and also the growth of the animal will depend on what you feed them. So, and how much nutrients they require. So lactating cows obviously need a lot of nutrients because they're trying to feed theoretically babies. In this case, you're probably producing for milk production. So you need to be ensuring that they get enough fats, enough protein, enough dry matter, etc. If you're growing a pig, for example, they need a lot of protein. So you're trying to find high proteins with high feed. You need feeds with high protein in it, such as 20%. Okay, grazing systems, once again, there's a whole heap of these: continuous, rotational, strip, break, set, creep, zero. Whatever you use here, if you decide to do one of these, you need to just explain why you're going to use that type of grazing system. What is the point of it? So the picture's showing you a break feed where they've got some animals behind a fence. You use this because then they utilize all the feed that is in the paddock. Often used in times where there is a lack of feed, so you're trying to make sure they eat what they have rather than wasting it. Okay, just the same as you at your home in your fridge. You will, if the fridge is full of really nice stuff, you'll pick only the stuff out that you like. But if there's not much in there, you'll eat whatever's there. So that's the sort of similar sort of type of situation. One that you may not have heard about is creep grazing. This is where it allows smaller stock to go through, as an example of one of those management practices. So lambs can go through, but the ewes cannot. So they have a little gap in the fence that only the small sheep can get through. And this means the lambs can access higher quality feed. Okay, weighing and drafting, obvious reasons here. You're able to manage how much or know how much nutrients your animals are getting. So if you're feeding them too much or not enough, or you're trying to get them to market at a certain time, then you need to understand how much you're feeding them. So it could be you need to be putting on weight 600 grams a day. So you need to be ensuring that they've got that much of feed. Otherwise, they're definitely not going to do it. So this is a management practice in which you can optimize those rates and have a good understanding of what's happening. Likewise with this next one, which is body condition scoring, this is understanding of what your animals look like and how much feed they require. So you might need to put extra weight on them if they're going to mating and they're too skinny, or if they are in milk production and they're not producing very much, they might be also too skinny. Fat cows also aren't good reproductive, so the fatter they are, the less likely they will conceive. So you need to be trying to get that at an optimum body condition score. Okay, so we're going to move on to health. Once again, there's a whole heap there. We're not going to cover all of them again. I'm just going to pick a few out. A huge range of health management practices there, and you need to understand why we carry them out. So oral drenching, so this is putting medicine essentially into the mouth of the animal. This is to reduce the parasites internally, so trying to get rid of those. So there it is telling you how to carry it out and why it's done there. If you want to just pause on that bit and you can come back to it later. Very similar with pour on, drench and dipping. This is external parasites on the outside. So this is putting chemicals on the outside to get rid of those external parasites such as flies, ticks, lice, etc. Okay, not very nice if you're constantly getting eaten by something. So one's showing you a rotation dipping, and then the other one's a pour on. Okay, dagging and shearing. This is also used to try and reduce fly strike. So you're removing all the dirty bits around the back of the sheep. You can also breed for this. So on one of the other ones, you can breed for having less wool around the anus. But basically, you're trying to remove that so flies aren't encouraged to lay the eggs in the wool of the sheep. Nate tagging, this is to do with registering them for notifiable diseases, so cattle and deer, or just for registering for your breeding purposes and to keep an identification of what you've done to what animal. Remember, you have to record all drugs that you've used. They cannot go to the works for a particular period of time if you have drenched them, okay? So that is really important. So just showing you a few pictures of what those tags look like. Okay, docking and tailing. So similar to what I've just discussed before, most of this is to do cleanliness and to reduce fly strike. So removing those tails so flies don't lay maggots there. Okay, lastly on the management practices, this is looking at shelter and climate. So once again, trying to provide those environments that are conducive to good growing. So shelter from the wind and the snow and the rain, but also shade from the sun in the summertime. So these can be complete controlled environments, which insects, horses, pigs, poultry live in. It can also just be lighting control, which sometimes is done to horses. It could be just having a warmer area where they can get away. Could be on a farm, just a tree. So depending on the livestock will depend on what shelter is required. So once again, some examples. So here's some examples of different environments. So a stable, barn for cows, and just a little tin shed to get them out of the conditions. So the difference between protected, this one, is that you have just provided a shelter and relatively nothing else. So they just can get in and out of it. Controlled environments is where they've controlled the water, the temperature, the light, and the whole building, everything. So these are animals that have all that manipulated for them. Okay, so these are predominantly done with insects, poultry, pigs. And what's done on most farms is shelter belts and trees. Okay, so it's just reducing that wind, making sure they can get out of the sun, and this causes less stress, and therefore they're going to put all their energy into growing. Just to remember, mindful there that pigs can't thermoregulate, so that is why they need shelter and often produced in controlled environments. So they can't cool themselves down and they can't warm themselves up. So often they predominantly grown in controlled environments where they have either like the one in the picture, or they will be in protected environments where they've got a shelter of some description. Okay, moving into merit. So what we need for merit. So for merit, as I said earlier, you need to be why those management practices are carried out, and you need to really link them to that growth and development or growth rates. So I've just put some words up there. You'll be able to look at this again later. So you need to be using these type of words, these sentences, to move you through into merit. So you will say, this management practice is done for this reason. It provides faster muscle and tissue development. Or utilizing this feed means it's a better food conversion efficiency because it breaks down or is digested easier. So depending on what management practice you're using will depend on which of these sentences is going to be relevant. Okay, but you're trying to show that you understand why that management practice is carried out. If you're not sure how to do that, talk about your management practice and then say, because of this, it does this. Or as a result of that, it does this. Okay, so these are just trying to link from your achieve section through to the merit. Okay, so that it's showing you have some understanding. Okay. Now, for excellence, you have to evaluate the management practice. Now, this can be done either comparing and contrasting or justifying why you are doing it. This one, not only do you have to state why you're doing it, you need to link it to quality, quantity, timing, and economics of production. Okay, so you need to state those reasons why you are doing them. So you need to relate it back to that effect on that growth and the effect on production, okay? And then state why that management practice is the best for doing that, or compare it to another one and say, why is it better than another one, using those ideas. So I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But once again, you need to be using those linking words, stating that you linked it from the management practice through to the merit understanding of growth and development, so increased growth rates, and then linking it through to why you would do it, because you send your product to market earlier or faster, or because your meat is of a higher quality, for example. So these are just trying to get you to link them through to that excellence. So just to repeat those 4 things that you need to cover, that's quality, quantity, timing, and economics of production. So those are all there. Quantity, obviously, is the increased amount of livestock. Quality is how good your product is. So link it back to that size, that fat, that colour, that taste. Why? What is the market wanting? And then linking your timing to getting it to market. So you're trying to either put it into a particular market and you're trying to get it there faster, usually because the price is better. So if you're looking at a Christmas market, you usually can make a really good money on that. But it does depend on the season, and production grown out of season usually is harder, and therefore you often will get better prices. And then lastly is economics. So having a good understanding of how much this costs, but also what price you're going to receive from obtaining these products and getting them to market. And these can be all manipulated by all of those management practices. Okay, so very quickly, there's just some more detail on quantity. So making sure that you have a run of organisms getting to market. So no one wants one cow of a particular weight. You normally have to send a line, which is normally a set amount of numbers. So it could be 50. You need 50 steers going to the market on the 24th of November. Okay, so that is your line, and you're trying to get that sufficient volume. If you don't meet that, you may have a negative of price, or you might be a penalty to pay because you didn't meet that. Does depend on the livestock and the market you're going into. But basically, you're trying to get enough animals to market. Okay, moving into quality. Once again, this will be dependent on your organism. So if you're looking at beef production or sheep production as the ones that's shown in the picture, you're trying to meet particular fat and muscle grades. Also colour, pH, and taste. If you're in production of brood mares, you're looking at the quality, the breeding behind that brood mare, okay, and looking at the size and conformation. So once again, depending on the livestock will depend on what that quality is. Timing. So this is either getting your product to market, it is either getting it to slaughtering, or it is trying to time all that to meet a particular market. So, for example, if your production of eggs, they're all year round. So you usually in winter, chooks don't produce eggs. So you have to use other management techniques in order to get eggs all year round. So how are you going to do it? You have to be able to coordinate maybe lighting, controlled environment to get that. Okay, but you're going to meet that market. So timing, once again, sometimes, as I said, they're growing out of season. So you need to be able to manipulate that in order to get your product to market. And then the thirdly is just trying to ensure that you have a high volume of high quality products. So trying to get them all to mate in one period of time so that you get a good line of animals all through at the same time. Okay, which is why we often don't have continuous mating. We only mate for a certain period of time. Okay, so in the dairy industry, we're all trying to have calving all done literally between 6 weeks and 2 to 2 months. You're trying to contain it. Otherwise, they occur all year round. And that's not ideal for milk production. Okay, and lastly, in terms of these production is economics. So most of the things we do is to earn good money and be able to put it back into our properties or continue farming, or to carry out all those good environmental activities that you need to do. So you're trying to get the best price. So getting your product to market earlier sometimes obtains a premium, but making sure you're of top quality always gets a premium. So I've got a few other things up there as well.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
Someone asked, is there a way in which we can combine quantity and economics of production by talking about the profit deficit as a result of not having enough quantity?
Yes, you can talk about that. That would be definitely a part of your excellence answer. Yes, yeah, because they're related. However, it will depend on the question. Sometimes they do a combination of things, and they might not ask you about one of those. But yeah, if they've asked you about both those, definitely. Okay. So yeah, what I'm going to say in the next bit is you do need to read the whole paper first before you decide on your livestock and your management practices. So don't just rush into the first question, because you might find your livestock doesn't allow you to go all the way to excellence, or you have a lot of knowledge on a particular livestock, and that is going to be really good for a particular question. So so if you knew a lot about like what you just talked about, you would be able to put that into a particular question. So, okay, so to do well, and this has come out of last year's assessment report, candidates who had a good knowledge of a range of species, that probably should say livestock, and you went in there not with prepared answers, but you just went in well prepared, those are the people that did well in the exam. So don't go in with prepared answers in case the questions don't meet your answer, because then you can often not write as well. So just go in knowing your stuff, and then just be flexible and answer the question well. Choosing that appropriate livestock is a must. You often can get achieved grades, but you can't move through to excellence, merit and excellence, because if you haven't done the appropriate livestock with appropriate question. Okay, so I can't really emphasize reading that whole paper first enough. So next bit is try to use your own livestock. Don't use the example in the picture. There has been, like I think last year, they had salmon, and a lot of people wrote about salmon, but not many people did very well. You're really better to go in knowing different organisms for different of those questions. You know there's going to be a question on reproduction or breeding, so you should go in with some sort of idea of what you're going to cover. Don't talk about salmon if you've never learned anything about it. It's really setting you up not to do very well. So just plan what you're going to do. Read the questions, then take a few minutes to plan what livestock and what management practices. Okay, I'm just going to take one question as an example from last year. So this was looking at shelter. So for the achieved question, you were just asked how farmers were providing that shelter. And that's the answer there. In this case, it was looking at if you're doing outside pigs or free-range pigs, that just providing some wooden huts, or if you were moving into big indoor commercial production, you would talk about controlled environments, talking about why you would have that, because it's going to increase your growth and development. So moving into the merit part of it, how does it improve growth and development? Because remember, pigs cannot thermoregulate, so they can't shiver when they're cold. They can't do that. So they just eat more, and they need to sleep with other pigs. So they also cannot cool themselves down. So if they get too cold or too hot, they get stressed. And if they're stressed, they do not eat, and therefore they're not going to grow. So you're trying to provide them that shelter to maximize their energy, and therefore they're going to convert that into using it into muscle development and also fat production. Okay, so you're going to have a better amount of pork produced per pig if they have shelter to keep warm or cool to keep cool. And then linking that to the excellence. In this case, this question was asking for economics and for quality. So how does that improve? How does shelter improve those two things? So for economics, so you can link both of these together, I should say. So you could say that by ensuring that your pigs are sheltered, that they're increasing that production. So in terms of they're putting all their digestible energy into growth and development and not into keeping warm. And therefore, you're going to get more pork production, so more muscle development, and therefore you will have more product to sell at the end of it. Also means that if they're, in terms of economics, the more pigs you have that are putting on weight, the more money you are going to make. Okay, so, and if they're too stressed, if the pigs are stressed, the meat doesn't taste very well. It has poor flavour and it is tough. Okay, no one wants to eat tough meat, so it will be downgraded. The price won't be as good. So quality and economics will be linked in this question to say why that is a good thing, why you are going to carry out shelter and not just let them free roam. Okay, that is more than enough talking from me. Are there any other questions?
Give it about 30 seconds in the chat, because we are lagging by about 30 seconds.
Okay, no, that's fine.
But I think that's us. I don't think there are any other questions.
Okay, excellent. Oh, well, good luck for exams next week, and all the best. Just remember to link those management practices with growth and development, and then through to quality, quantity, timing, and economics of production, and you'll be good. Good luck.
Cool. Just I thought give a wee final sign off. So on behalf of Study It and Doug and I, thank you, Kerry, for taking the time to run this tutorial. I'm sure Isaac says thanks. I'm sure all those who will end up watching this will appreciate it. Other than that, if you have any questions, you can head over to Study It and ask them in the chat, or you can save them till the next live stream, which I believe is tomorrow sometime.
That's right. Yep. I'm back again tomorrow. Yep.
So we'll see you then. Ka kite.
Good luck.